Welcome to the Psychology World podcast with me, Connor Whiteley, psychology student and international best-selling psychology author of over 30 psychology books, bringing you the latest psychology news, fascinating psychology topics and more each week. If you want to learn more, then please check out connorwhiteley.net/books. And don't forget to like and subscribe to the YouTube video or follow on your favourite podcast app. And here's the show. Hi everyone, and welcome to episode 305 of the Psychology World podcast with me, Colin Whiteley. And today's episode is something we've never done before on the podcast. We are actually focusing on a business psychology topic for the first time in podcast history. So I'm actually quite glad about this, and I think this is a really good podcast episode that she gets us thinking about business psychology, because we're going to be learning about how our interviews are failing us. And it's Sunday, the 12th of January 2025, as I record this. So the reason why today is a really good podcast episode is because job interviews, we can't escape them. Doesn't matter whether you're applying for a job at your university, an assistant psychologist, a clinical psychologist, or any other form of psychologist. You simply cannot escape the job interview process, because that's how the job market has operated for the past 200 years. So this isn't going to change any time soon, but it's interesting to see how job interviews are failing us, because they're not good, they're not effective, and they're certainly not a valid measure of future job performance. So that's something that we're going to build upon in today's podcast episode, and we're going to learn a lot of it. Because by the end of this podcast episode, you're going to learn the three main drawbacks of job interviews, and also how can we possibly improve the recruitment process, which, if you want to be a business psychologist in the future, is going to be absolutely critical for you to understand. So you've got that to look forward to in the content part of today's episode. So moving on to the psychology news section, we're reading from the British Psychological Society Research Digest. And the first one is, are artificial naps on the horizon? For more than a century, we've known that sleep boosts cognitive performance. The big question is, how exactly? One popular idea is that toxins which accumulate in the brain whilst we're awake are cleared away during a good night's sleep. But this theory, known as the glammic system hypothesis, can't explain how people can perform better on taxing tests after just a brief nap. New research led by Natasha Cardvez at Weill Cornell Medical School provides some compelling insights on why this happens, with data suggesting that it might even be possible to use brain stimulation techniques to mimic the beneficial effects of sleep whilst awake. Okay, so that's quite a good one. Let's see what I start us off with the new year, because I know that lots of people, they want to try and fix their sleep schedules. We all know that sleep is important to us, so we all want more healthy patterns of sleep. Now, interestingly, I've covered another psychology news article in 2024, and that basically debunked the whole idea that we are asleep because it gets rid of the toxins, all the toxins over. So I definitely think that theory isn't bulletproof. I don't even think it's a very good theory, because there's a lot of more modern research which shows that that isn't the case and that isn't the function of sleep. But I do think it's interesting when we look at brain stimulation techniques, because it'd be interesting to see the real world applications of this. Because if we need to use beneficial effects of sleep whilst being awake, then I think that it'd be interesting to see, can this boost our productivity? Can this increase feelings of well-being? But also, I'd be interested in seeing some of the darker applications and make sure that we don't fall into those traps. Because if your brain thinks that you're sleeping, then it means that you're going to be able to work longer because you won't be tired. but also how would this affect your circadian rhythm? Or would this lead to an increase in insomnia and extra pressure from bosses because they want you to be more productive by wearing this headset or whatever the brain stimulation is delivered? Interesting food for thought. And the second one is Ticketat Cynthia reveals links to dyslexia. So Cynthia comes in a wide range of forms, so many in fact it's impossible to list them all. Some people perceive colours when they hear music, for example, whereas others perceive every word as having its own unique taste. There are even those with what's known as Tic-Tac Cynthia, TTS, who, when they hear speech, perceive it as subtitles in their minds. Recent research on 17 people with this particular form of unusual sensory processing has now revealed insights into why it happens. The results suggest that in some way TTS is the opposite of dyslexia, a disorder in the difficulty in reading and writing that affects an estimated 1 in 10 people in the UK. And whilst there's not a great amount that I can actually say about this psychology news article, it's simply because I don't have much experience in terms of like looking into this area or much of my own knowledge. I would just simply say that this is another reason why I do these psychology news articles, because it's always interesting to look at this sort of not necessarily stranger, but the more unusual and the more uncommon forms of mental health conditions that impact our ability to read, process information, and to process sensory inputs. Because such an important part of like functioning, that is really important that we understand it. Not only so that if these people with the more unusual mental health conditions actually need the extra support, support though, but by studying people who have atypical forms of sensory processing, it helps us to understand the way that a typical sensory processing happens. So it's always quite interesting from different research points of view. And the last one is, and while a new year presents the opportunity for a new start, it's important to remember that we're only human. Expecting every goal to be flawlessly achieved, every decision to be the right one, is unrealistic and can lead us right into burnout. Over at Psychology Today, several psychologists take a look at the trap of perfectionism and reflect on how research and their own experiences can help us avoid it. So I really do recommend going over to Psychology Today and looking at that perfectionism one. I think we might have covered it on the podcast before, but after 305 episodes, really don't keep and I really don't really remember what we've done and what we haven't done most of the time. But I'd definitely say that the new year is definitely time to like, set some goals. Set yourself some goals that you want to achieve. Set some plans that are going to make you happy. But if you don't hit them, of course, always strive to try and hit them. But if you don't, it's fine. It doesn't matter. You're only a human. There are only so many hours in the day, and as long as you try, then you can just readjust. So you just got to think of it like that, and just try and hit your New Year's plans, or plans that were. But some, for example, like my New Year plans, hit a major snag Friday and Saturday, because Friday was just a very not autism friendly day up in London, because I wanted to go up there with some family, and there was no plan, and it just was nothing worked out basically. So instead of being out for 5 hours, I was out for 11 hours. I had stuff to do because of my New Year's goals. I had a whole bunch of stuff that would have made me really happy if I just hadn't gone to London, but I wanted to balance it with wanting to see my family and making them happy. But also, though, like yesterday when I came back to Canterbury, it was a whole few different like bits and pieces because we had a friend round, and it was busy there because everyone was coming back to the house. So we wanted to spend time together. But again, that hit my New Year's ago. So yeah, but those days are going to happen. So I didn't beat myself up about it because it's just one of those things. And it was still really nice seeing the people. So I hope you enjoyed the psychology news section. So let's move on to the personal update. So we're moving on to the personal update. So this week has been very good. I'm really happy with everything that I've done because it's been a very productive week. I've done lots of different projects, lots of different bits and pieces that are really going to help me in the future. And I also decided, yes, I do need to try and like book some more work experience. And thankfully, where I am in the UK, there is a local NHS trust, which is our National Health Service, that does do psychology and health research, which I have to admit is not my first choice. But considering that psychology is so well protected in the NHS and you cannot get work experience with a psychology team, at least I haven't because it's so protected and it's like you cannot just get into psychology. But that's a whole different debate and that's a whole different bowl of annoyance for me. Well, I am going to just apply for this health research and try and do a week in there because it's just some work experience. It's something in the NHS, and it does give me some extra research, which isn't something that I really need because what I need is clinical experience. But at the moment, I just cannot find any, which is annoying. But that's life. And from my point of view, it's sort of a case of just do what you can, the limited options that you've actually got. And then on a fun note, on Friday I went up to London to see The Lion King. So it was a whole palaver that day, but The Lion King is really good. I'm not entirely sure it's my sort of story, but it's really good because if you can ever go and see the musical, the costumes are amazing, the story's really clever, and the way how they do certain scenes is actually just quite mind blowing because it's just so good. So I really do recommend it if you're ever in London or anywhere else that does The Lion King. And as always, I always love to hear your thoughts and feelings on today's episode. So you can always email me, connorwhiteley@connorwhiteley.net. You can always leave a comment out of the show notes at connorwhiteley.net/podcast. And you can always tweet me on Twitter at sci-fi or leave a comment on the Facebook post or LinkedIn post. I always love to hear from all of you because it really helps make the podcast feel more like a conversation. And always feel free to send me pictures of where you're listening in from because I always love to see where you're listening from all over the world. And today's podcast episode has been sponsored by Applied Psychology, applying social psychology, cognitive psychology, and more to the real world. So the reason why this is a really good sponsor for today's episode is because we're talking about business psychology. And the whole point of business psychology is applying psychological theory to real-world business problems. And that's what the entire area of applied psychology does. So it's great, really easy to understand book. We look at a lot of different subject areas and a lot of real-world problems. For example, talking and other language comprehension activities and other interventions. We'll talk about sports psychology, business psychology, and when it comes to the business psychology, we're very much focusing on employee well-being, but also leadership. So there's a lot of really good areas about that, and there's a lot of really interesting information about how can we improve the well-being of our employees because of the various stress models, because work is stressful. So how do we minimize that just so they can stay in work, keep working, and their mental health can be protected. But then I also talk about leadership. So how does leadership, so what are the psychological theories about leadership and how can they impact a performance, and a whole range of other benefits. And some of the models are very good on paper, but in reality, they really don't work that well. So that's something else that we find that's really interesting about business psychology. And then I will also talk about a whole bunch of other great areas like misinformation, conspiracy theories, and so many more great areas that I really do recommend that you read about. So whether that's applied psychology, applying social psychology, cognitive psychology, and more to the real world. Available at all major ebook retailers, and you can order the paperback and the hardback version from Amazon, your local bookstore or local library if you requested. And if you want to get the audiobook narrated by artificial intelligence, now you can add selected audiobook retailers like Spotify, Kobo, Google Play, Barnes& Noble, and selected library systems like Biblioteca, Overdrive, and Baker and Taylor. So while buying books helps to support the creation and the editing of the podcast, my time is sponsored by my wonderful patrons. And as always, a massive thank you to my patrons. Your support shows that you like the show and you want to continue. So if you wanted to become a patron and get access to tons of great rewards, now you can patreon.com/the Psychology World podcast. Or if you want to support the podcast on a one-off basis, now you can buymeacoffee.com/Conor Wiley. So that's enough for the personal update. Let's move on to the content part of today's episode. So moving on to the content part of today's episode. So we're going to be talking about how a job industry is failing us. This is a great podcast episode. I really enjoyed it, so I know you're going to love it too. So let's dive into it. How a job industry is failing us. When we really start thinking about job interviews, we have to admit that they are very, very strange. For example, imagine you're a world famous singer being asked to judge a singing competition. The only catch is you cannot listen to the singers actually sing. Instead, you can only interview them about their songs. That's it. You cannot hear their singing performance. You can only talk to them about the songs. It makes no sense, does it? That is exactly how job interviews have worked for the past 200 years. For some reason, employers believe that they can understand and predict future job performance by simply talking to someone about their skills. Or to use an example more relevant to the audience of this podcast, if we're a mental health service looking for new psychologists, so what we want to see how effective they are at delivering psychological therapies to our clients. The only way to test their skills is to have them deliver a therapy to a client. Yet instead, our base level is to simply talk to them about what they might do, and we're only interviewing them about their skills. That doesn't give us much of a measure of their actual skills in the real world, does it? Also, I should note here that I'm not some jaded person who's been rejected by interviews and I failed them. So I don't hate them. In fact, I get most of the interviews I've been for, and I know how to sound good in an interview. Thanks for helping other students who do interviews preparation through my university's outreach work. Instead, I'm just an aspiring clinical psychologist taking a look at the research behind job interviews. In addition, Wingate and all 2024 published a meta-analysis with over 30,000 participants and found that job interviews do not predict future job performance. In other words, interviewing a future worker might not be a very useful way to make better hiring decisions. Job interviews create the myth of the perfect interview question. One of the main problems with the job interview is that a lot of people believe that if you simply ask the right questions, then you will uncover the truth about a job candidate. This leads HR departments and bosses to create situational, judgmental scenarios, behavioral questions, as well as technical assessments that the employer believes reveal the perfect person for the job. In reality, the research tells a different story because whether or not you're trying to assess a candidate's behaviour, task related skills, or their interpersonal skills, interviews are still problematic since interviews show a low level of accuracy because structured as well as unstructured interviews don't predict a candidate's future performance. Moreover, you should know that job interviews are okay at best in terms of predicting broader contextual behaviour and task specific skills. They suggest that the standard interview format might not be effective at best or too blunt of a tool at worst to capture the nuances that diverse jobs require. And I think if we apply this to our own profession of a clinical psychology, the typical clinical psychologist never has 2 days the same, and they work with lots of different clients. Some days are high stress, others low stress. Some days a psychologist has to do a lot of back to back sessions, and other times that they might be out of the office doing assessments or interventions in other settings. Also, some days they might be doing a lot of systemic work because of a particular client, and another day they might be dealing with safeguarding issues. How can an interview possibly capture how a psychologist would handle all those different tasks? How could you possibly design interview questions to accurately measure how a job candidate would respond to each of these scenarios? And most importantly, where is the measurement precision? On the whole, the problem with job interviews is that they are typically seen as a one size fits all instrument for assessing a candidate's capacity to do a job. Yet in reality, it is impossible to design interview questions that accurately demonstrate how a person will respond in the diverse situations they will face in the job. Such as, what interview questions could you possibly create that would accurately measure how an engineer would investigate a possible source of failure, or the sales representative's client relationship skills? You cannot. Job interviews create an illusion of accuracy. Another important reason why job interviews fail people is because in a job interview, you sit across from a potential candidate for 60 minutes. Within these 60 minutes, you ask them a whole bunch of inaccurate questions designed to gauge their future performance, and in reality, their job performance only accounts for 9% of variance in a future job performance. That leaves 91% of variance unaccounted for. In other words, job interviews fail to explain the other 91% of how well a candidate will do in a job in the future. This is completely overlooked by the interview process, and you can compare it to trying to predict the outcome of a football game by watching players talk in the locker room. And as you can tell, I don't know much about sports. Anyway, this failure to account for the vast majority of the variance only goes to show that interviews are not valid ways to assess a client's capacity to do the job, as well as it is a complete and utter illusion that job interviews are accurate tools, and this can cost businesses dearly. Recently, me and a friend of mine were talking about his placement interviews and how they were going at the moment, and I learned two things looking back. Firstly, I know he has the skills for a clinical psychology placement because he's done audits. He's worked with his mum at a HIV clinic, and he has medical expertise, at least a little. Also, we bonded over our love of clinical psychology, so I know that he has the skills, the passion, and the potential to grow and benefit from a placement in an NHS mental health setting. Yet he hasn't gotten a placement yet, and he sent me some of his interview questions, and they were just shockingly bad at gauging how he would respond in a real world work in environment. This is why interview questions are so inaccurate and bad indicators uh, of how people would do in the real world. You only need to look around you at your own workspace to see a few people who pass the interviews, but they're so bad at their job that you don't understand how they're working here, and you know I'm right about this. Job interviews create a fit fallacy. The main reason why I wanted to do this podcast episode was because my dad does a lot of interviewing as part of his engineering job. He's basically a manager in all but name, and he tells me about his interviewing from time to time. Whenever he talks to me about fit and the personal skills, I just have to admit I am always sort of skeptical. So I don't understand how he can understand someone's fit within his team when the candidate doesn't always get to meet other people. Sometimes my dad does take the candidate around the workshop, so that is slightly better. However, a final issue with job interviews is that there is a massive overemphasis within companies on cultural fit. At first, this sounds like a very good idea because you want people who align with your company's values, believes in what you're doing, and fits within the team dynamics, so that there is less conflict and people can focus on their work and making the company money. Although the issue of the idea of fit is that it leads to homogeneity instead of company diversity. Ultimately, this leads to the company workforce looking, thinking, and acting alike whenever a company focuses on cultural fit. Again, this makes perfect sense because we are more comfortable around others who are like us in terms of similar backgrounds, interests, as well as ways of thinking and working. On the other hand, this is a problem because it can certainly create an easygoing and harmonious workplace. Just because someone fits into a company doesn't mean that they should be working there. Cultural fit does not improve the candidate has the skills, abilities, and experience to be working in the role they're applying for. On the whole, whenever a company focuses on cultural fit, the company risks creating an echo chamber where new ideas and perspectives are very rare, and this can make a organization neglect the actual capacities required for a individual to perform and for the organization to grow itself and develop. A person's true performance doesn't rely on cultural fit alone. It actually relies on a mixture of cultural fit and most importantly, the candidate's current skills and capacity to do the job well, and their ability to grow in the future as they develop and learn their skills. For example, in my own experience, when it comes to other student ambassadors, every single one of them are perfect cultural fits, but it certainly doesn't make them good ambassadors. It seriously doesn't. They might want to support students, but they aren't social. They don't talk with students and they don't engage with them. Those are the core aspects of the job. Most of the time, ambassadors have to be pushed to engage with their students, or they just stand there in the corner talking with their backs to the students. That's not good. Thankfully, there are a lot more good ambassadors than bad ones, but still, if job interviews were so great, then all these ambassadors who cannot do their job would not be getting in. Bringing this back to job interviews, this is only further proof that job interviews might be able to evaluate cultural fit, but they are very weak in predicting potential and future job performance. How can we improve the job recruitment process? One of the main duties of a business psychologist is helping organizations with their recruitment processes. So I want to have a quick look at ways to improve an organization's hiring processes to help overcome these issues. Firstly, an organization can focus on past performance as a more accurate indicator of future job performance. An organization can do this by digging and examining a candidate's concrete achievements and how a candidate achieves these in the first place. This is drawing on real world experience, so you can see how a candidate has actually managed in the real world workplace. Secondly, an organization can use a diverse range of assessment tools in their recruitment process. For instance, they could use an assessment center that uses a wide range of job stimulations. skills assessment, and work sample tests to evaluate a candidate based on their actual job-related tasks. Also, the added benefit of doing this is that this method evaluates candidates on their job-related skills instead of their ability to perform well in an interview. Finally, organisations can focus on cultural contribution instead of exclusively on cultural fit. I mention this because an organisation could look for a candidate that fits their current organisational culture, whilst making sure that they can contribute positively and even go as far as enhance your organisational culture at the same time. Conclusion. As much as I never look at business psychology, I have to admit that I think I will be investigating this sub-discipline of psychology over the next year. I'll be finishing my master's in September, and then I'll be off into the world of work. Hopefully a mental health job, and I love psychology because you can apply it to everyday life. Therefore, as much as I say I'm not interested in organisational psychology, I actually think as I start moving into the working world and I can start to place some of these research findings into the world around me, my interest will only grow. For example, it's been interesting learning about how job interviews are failing us because they create an illusion of accuracy, the myth of the perfect interview question, and the focus on cultural fit. These are all problems that not only negatively impact job candidates, but the organisations themselves too. Thankfully, there are ways like focusing on past performance, focusing on cultural contribution instead of cultural fit, and using a diverse range of assessment tools so that can help organisations overcome these problems. And I think the most exciting thing about this topic is that jobs are meant to nurture a person's potential, their skills, and their experiences. And as I try to gain more work experience in mental health settings, I'm really looking forward to the future because I get to learn a lot, develop my skills, and take another step closer to hopefully becoming a fully qualified clinical psychologist. Therefore, I'll end this podcast episode by saying that all of us could be potential game changing in employees for a business, as much as we might doubt it because of our current skills. Yet, I want you to remember that always try to improve your interview skills, because that is the current state of the job market and recruitment processes. Just remember something for me. You, as the game changing in an employee, might not interview the best, but your true potential is just waiting to be unlocked, developed, and nurtured. You are probably so much better than you think, so keep applying for jobs, keep trying to become a psychologist, and keep taking steps forward towards your dream career. It might seem impossible, but you can get there. I believe in you, so please believe in yourself. So I really hope that you enjoyed today's episode and you got something out of it. I know that I did, because as much as I say I'm not interested in business psychology, this was a brilliant topic to look into. So I'm really glad that I did do this podcast episode because it was a lot of fun. If you know anyone who would enjoy today's episode, then please share it with them. I'm always really grateful when you wonderful people help spread the words about the podcast. And if you want to learn more, then please check out Applied Psychology, available in all the usual places. And if you want to support the podcast on a monthly basis, then please head on over to patreon.com/the Psychology World Podcast. Or if you want to support the podcast on a one-off basis, then you can at buymeacoffee.com/Con Whiteley. So have a great day, everyone, and I'll see you next time. Found it helpful. Please remember to like the video and subscribe to the YouTube channel and follow the podcast on your favourite podcast app. And if you wanted to learn more, then please check out the backlist of the podcast episodes or my books at conwhiteley.net. So have a great day, and I'll see you next time.